Good morning and welcome to the SB4 Accelerator Lab Virtual and Educational Workshop Series. The program is a partnership between DCG Strategies and the San Francisco Interfaith Council. A special thanks, the SB4 Accelerator Lab is supported by a generous grant from the Crankstart Foundation. A bit of housekeeping: today's program is being recorded. For audio and video, all participants are muted and without video to minimize distraction. For chat, you can submit a question or comment by selecting the chat button at the bottom of your screen and sending a message to Q&A. Questions will be forwarded to the host and answered time permitting. For closed captions, select the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and click Enable Live Transcription. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trey. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council and our collaborating partner, DCG Strategies, I want to welcome you to this first in a series of 3 virtual educational workshops entitled the SB4 Housing Accelerator Lab, Fast Tracking Affordable Housing on Faithland in San Francisco. This series is funded by a generous grant from the Crankstart Foundation and is designed to empower San Francisco congregations with property to take the next step toward building affordable housing. This first workshop, entitled Housing Development 101, Part 1, and offers a practical overview of the early stages of affordable housing development with a focus on faith-based organizations. Experts will walk attendees through initial concepts, feasibility studies, risk management, and how to stay mission-centered throughout the process. Learn how to collaborate with key partners and explore case studies of successful projects to inspire their own development journey. We are very blessed to have as our featured presenters Landis Graydon, the Chief Executive Officer and founder of DCG Strategies. Landis is a serial entrepreneur, having founded over 10 companies. Most recently, he is the co-founder of a technology startup company, as well as co-founder and board member of United Tech Cities, a nonprofit organization focused on preparing underrepresented youth and young adults for fulfilling careers in STEAM fields. Megan McIver, Vice President of DCG Strategies. Megan is Vice President of Real Estate at DCG Strategies, where she leads strategic real estate projects with a focus on faith-based communities. She brings extensive experience from all roles at JLL, the Signal Group, and CIP Capital, with over $1 billion in commercial real estate transactions. Megan is also a candidate for ordination in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and is pursuing a Master's of Divinity in Berkeley while leading children's ministry at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in San Francisco. She holds degrees from the University of Chicago and Columbia University. And finally, we have Paul McElwee. With over 25 years of experience, Paul's career has focused on the design of residential communities with specialized experience in affordable multifamily and senior housing projects, encompassing assisted living, special needs, and permanent supportive housing. A licensed architect and LEED accredited professional, Paul received a Bachelor of Architecture from Carnegie Mellon University and is a member of the East Bay Housing Organization's Faith and Justice Committee. We are so grateful to our featured presenters. And Megan, I'm going to hand the floor over to you to take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. We are looking forward to talking about this really important topic. And Trey, I'm wondering if we might be able to bring up the slides. Thanks so much. Yeah, so welcome again. This is what we're calling Affordable Housing Development 101, Part 1. This is part of our initiative, which I'll talk about in a little bit, called the SB4 Housing Accelerator Lab for faith institutions in the city and county of San Francisco. Thanks. So I'll start today with a little bit of an overview of where we're headed and talk as well about our goals for today's session. Note as well that this is the first of 3 sessions we'll be offering, all of which are online. So today's workshop really is meant to inspire the imagination of faith communities in the city and county of San Francisco. We know that development is a complex topic, even for real estate professionals. This is a really specialized domain. And so our intention is not to make folks experts on all aspects of development. That would be crazy for a 3-hour series. But really, we want to impart an overview so that congregations can start to have informed discernment processes about whether this path is right for them and whether they're called to this path. And part of that is also understanding what key professional relationships are involved in the development process. We're very lucky to be joined by Paul McElwee from HKIT, who'll be talking about how congregations can have a strong and fruitful relationship with an architect as part of the development process. So we're starting with some introductions, and then we'll move into a big picture overview of development, talking about timelines and milestones. Then we'll talk about what I call the foundation, which is congregational discernment practices that ensure that this decision that you're going to make, which is going to impact your community and your entire parish community, your neighborhood, your city, is the right one for your congregation at this point in time. Then we'll talk a little bit about suitability. And here we see 2 portions of suitability, both physical in terms of the real estate constraints and congregational. We'd then like to provide an overview of key development terms so that you kind of have a grasp of what to look out for and some things that we think you should know just in terms of vocabulary as you really approach this process. We'll then turn to a case study about Glad Tidings in Hayward, which we led by Landis Braden. And finally, Paul will join us to talk about the practice of the architect within this development process. So we'll move next. We talked about this already. This workshop series is part of the program that DCG and San Francisco Interfaith Council are undertaking with generous support from Crankstart Foundation. There are really 3 aspects to this program, and this workshop series is the first. So we know that in order to be effective, congregations need to be empowered with real estate knowledge. So that these workshops are really part of that. The second part of the program is we're working directly with the planning department in the city of San Francisco to take a look at all of the sites across the city and county that could be eligible for SB4. And we're really creating a funnel system to identify those sites with the most promise. Part of that funnel system, as I mentioned, is that congregational capacity piece, and that's something that DCG is uniquely placed to help congregations evaluate. And finally, and this is important, and we'll come to this at the end of the session, we are providing, if you could just go back one slide, Trey, we're providing pre-development feasibility analyses to a select number of congregations, and the application form for that grant will be available at the end of this session. So thank you. I want to give a little background about who we are. I'm a vice president at DCG Strategies. We've been around for 20 years doing this work for what we call mission-driven organizations in California. We are real estate experts, but I think one of the things that I really love about working here is that all of us on the senior team are also very active leaders in our own faith communities. So we like to say we speak 2 languages. We understand faith communities, how decisions are made, how complex those decisions are, multi-layered. We're not just looking for the most profitable solution. We're in processes of discernment, and we also are commercial real estate professionals. So I come from commercial real estate, kind of at the institutional level, and Landis as well has extreme experience as a planning commissioner, and we're all experts in those domains. So I think there's sort of this magic that happens when both of those domains come together. So we'll go forward. And just to give you a sense of kind of our scope, again, just a high level part of what I love to do best is working with congregations and leading strategic discernment sessions. But we also are a full service real estate shop. So we do analysis, we do planning, we do project management. We also offer brokerage services and as well asset management once developments are kind of in the ground and up and running. Thank you. And of course, San Francisco Interfaith Council, we all know, is at the heart of bringing diverse faith communities together to advance social issues, convening and amplifying the voice of the city's faith-based communities on issues like homelessness, disaster preparedness, civil rights, housing affordability, immigration, and so much more. Thank you. I want to mention briefly that this collaboration is not our first. So San Francisco Interfaith Council and DCG Strategies worked together previously last year, actually, to offer a program called the Ministry of Housing, which had a similar focus in terms of empowering faith communities to understand all aspects of real estate development so that they could take the next step in moving forward. And we managed to train over 120 individual congregations in real estate development fundamentals. So we'll start off now with really the big picture, an overview of the development process. This is a really simplified slide, but I want to talk about kind of where that preliminary pre-development feasibility analysis that I talked about fits within the larger scheme of development. So for congregations who are discerning whether their land might be a candidate for the development of supportive or affordable housing, this overview is important because it provides a general sense of all of the stages that need to happen before you can imagine having tenants move in. So we're going to really focus on the first stage today, and well, let's say the first 3 or so. So this first stage is discernment, initial feasibility, and conceptualization. So at this stage, a congregation wants to be focusing on clarifying mission and call, confirming congregational capacity, and really assessing site suitability. And that's where the preliminary pre-development feasibility analysis comes in. So we're providing these studies through this grant with the Crankstart Foundation, and really that information comes at the beginning of this process. It provides a green light, red light, go, no go analysis. So DCG will take a look at your property and we will let you know whether it's really worth investing additional congregational resources, which, as we know, are so hard to come by in this property, and whether it's a good candidate for development. Once you've made that initial determination, the next step, and really all of these steps should be happening concurrently, is team building and stakeholder engagement. So here we want to think about, where does your community sit within its parish? And when I say parish, I mean that in kind of the historical sense. What communities does your community care for in its vicinity? What are the key groups or vulnerable folks that you're looking to serve in developing this affordable or supportive housing model? And who are the partners that can help you do that? It's important as well to consider city officials as part of that team and really understand, what resources do you have as a congregation, what needs do you have as a congregation, and making sure that those ministry needs are part of that consideration. The next step really is kind of a deeper dive, so a feasibility study and entering into a partnership with a developer. So I talked about this preliminary study. At this point, at this third part of the phase, you would be conducting a pre-development feasibility study. This includes some technical studies that position the congregation to step into what we really want to call a marriage with a developer partner. So this developer is the entity that's going to be taking on a financial risk in terms of for the entire project. It's going to be your partner for the execution of your vision. One thing we really like to recommend that congregations consider is securing what we call an owner representative for that congregation. And so as part of that, it's making sure that the congregation's ministry priorities are represented in any sort of development that eventually ends up taking place. So an owner representative would be the one that is reaching back into the congregation, understanding the congregation's priorities, understanding the congregation's gifts, but then also protecting that congregation in its relationship with the developer to ensure that the development is crafted in such a way that the congregation's ministry is protected and its vision is advanced. Finally, we have what we're calling the design and planning phase. This is really led by your developer partner, which is why it's so important to find that good fit. Included in this phase is an architectural design, deeper engineering and environmental impact studies, and a sort of formal planning review processes. All of this then leads, of course, to once you find funding, which should be there in that column prominently, you would begin construction, leasing, and then prior to this as well, we want to think about setting up an operational structure and perhaps a nonprofit entity that's going to make decisions on behalf of this new development, but that's very linked to the congregation. And here too, I think we want to think about how will we know whether this development is a success? And we need to think about what metrics we're going to use to know whether we've been successful or not in achieving our vision. So thank you. I included this slide. I think, at DCG, we work with congregations on many different types of real estate questions. And regardless of whether it's, should we lease out this empty space to a preschool, or, should we embark on a 5, 8, 10, 12-year development project, I think these things are essential to any real estate decision. So the first pillar, if we start on the left, is discernment and internal alignment. And I'll talk about that in more detail, but here I think it's important to articulate to ourselves as a community, who are we as a community of faith, not just a church, but any community of faith? What are our core values, and what does our community need? Here we do a needs and resources assessment as well. So we identify our gifts and what we're called to do here and now. And I think making that statement coherent and visible to the community creates a sense of momentum, of power that's going to sustain you through that long development process. The second pillar is really thinking, placing the ministry first. So the ministry of your unique congregation and your impact. What are our current and future space needs? And how can we imagine new life in underutilized spaces? So taking a fresh look at your real estate and congregational resources. And finally, for any congregational real estate decision, you're going to identify your leaders, your partners, and your plan. So who will be responsible for making those difficult decisions? Who will be that central point of contact internally for the congregation that will then interface with real estate professionals? This is important because real estate professionals like to have a really organized decision-making mechanism so that they really feel that when they're speaking to that leader, that person that's managing the project, that person has a clear sense and is representing the interest of that congregation in a way that's clear, that's decisive, and that's binding, so that they can move forward with the next stage in their technical process. Thank you. So I've talked about the importance of prayerful discernment. We can move forward. And I'll just highlight that, again, without this step, it's sort of like you don't want to proceed without having this step completely solidified. And I think also just from a pastoral or thinking about community health and a ministry, this piece can actually be kind of an end in itself, regardless of whether development is the answer or not. I think this activity of really getting to know mission and vision and values for a congregation and constantly renewing that in a really specific way. So I've worked with congregations to try to help them articulate their vision statement, and folks say, oh, well, we already have a mission statement, it's on the website. And that mission statement might be something like, coming together in faith to bear Christ's love to the world, which is absolutely true. And in some sense, many churches would say that that's what they're doing. Other faith communities would say that in a different way. But what I sort of challenge congregations to do is to get extremely specific about what their purpose is here and now, and to articulate that to themselves in a mission statement that then can be the foundation for this project moving forward. So, we're a community of faith called to serve our senior, those most vulnerable in our community by providing housing and XYZ. So the more precise you can get about that, the better placed you are to uncover resources that are going to really power your development. And part of that is understanding your community needs. So who is my neighbor? So who do I love and how do I love them? And the second thing is, what does success look like? How will we know that we are living out our mission, and how are we going to measure those things? One of the key points of any real estate education that DCG does is to sort of inform and empower congregations to know that you don't have to do any of this alone. I think that many faith communities are strong because they have this sort of ethos or practice of being really scrappy and doing things on their own, which has served congregations really well in a lot of ways. For things like big things like development processes that, again, could take a decade or more realistically, you may want to consider consuming professional resources. And DCG is here as part of these educational workshops to help you understand what those resources are, how you can find someone who's really going to be on your side, and how you as a congregation can position yourself to work effectively with that outside partner. So at this stage, that might look like hiring an external facilitator to really undertake this process of discernment. And that's just something that I'll offer to faith communities, that there are folks out there who can do that for you. And this can be a really foundational part of the process. So thank you. We'll hear a little bit more about All Souls Episcopal Parish in Berkeley and Jordan Court, which is their affordable housing development. But I want to have that quote come up as central to this portion. Trey, if we could just go back. So Father Phil said, "Believe it deeply and hold it lightly." So this is in relation to the congregation's vision for the future, for its ministry, but also for any real estate development. The development process is so challenging and long, or can be, that it's important to have faith in that larger set of mission and vision and values that's sort of your north guiding star. But at the same time, as Father Phil says, it's important to hold it lightly, meaning that things are going to change. You're going to have to adapt. Probably the vision that you end up with might not look exactly like the one that you thought it would at the beginning. And so as part of that, it's having this groundedness in deep belief, but also holding it lightly and seeing how the Spirit and how things unfold. So thank you. We'll talk a little about suitability. So if we can go forward. There are so many factors that go into understanding the physical suitability of real estate. So I'll just list a few of these here. The first is, of course, zoning and land use regulations. SB4, as we know, is an important piece of legislation, but there are certain constraints attached to that. So, for example, yes, faith communities are now by right zoned for 100% affordable housing. However, that might not be what we call the product type that's right for your site. And so SB4 may or may not be something that you use as part of your development process. There are other things like zoning and land use regulations that, of course, dictate the envelope or the size of what and type of thing that you can build on a site that you own. And so it's good to work with a real estate professional to discern that. Another part of real estate suitability is parcel size. So most developers, they're ultimately in a business, and they need to be sustainable, and so they're looking to make sure that they have enough space to develop a sizable project that allows them to have some sort of profit. And so typically, we say, or the threshold generally these days, is your site should be large enough to contain about 50 units, so 50 units. We also think about things like configuration and access. We have had a number of congregations come to us and say, well, we'd like to build a building on our back parking lot. And we said, well, that's going to provide a problem for fire trucks who will not be able to get in and turn around. And there are ways to sort of look at the piece of land that you have and immediately kind of spot some of those issues that may become hindrances. So configuration and access is an important part of evaluating your site. Another important part is infrastructure and utility availability. There are environmental considerations. So, in California, we're in seismic zones. The quality of the soil, whether you're in a flood zone, all of those things need to be taken into account. And, people say, well, why aren't there more developments on abandoned, gas stations, for example? Well, there are a lot of environmental considerations, as you can imagine, on sites that may previously have hosted something like that. And so these specialized studies that you'll do with the developer will hopefully uncover all of those issues. And then finally, parking, and that relates to zoning and land use. There are parking requirements or parking minimums depending on what type of product, meaning what type of residential product you build on that site. Then again, this is the point that I really want to make is assessing congregational capacity and calling. So do you have alignment within leadership, not only in your faith community, but perhaps in the regional judicatory that your community might be part of? Are you all aligned? Do you have decision-making processes? Are you a community that's regularly meeting together and perhaps working through disagreements in order to come to a decision? Do you have that practice in place? How, do you think that it's realistic to have a community durability through a development process that could take 12 years? Do you have that capacity as well, just as you think about all of the other ministries that you're involved with, to have really weekly engagement at almost like a part-time job level in a development project? And it's important to be realistic about that. Are there governance considerations within your individual faith community that support such an undertaking? Thanks. And we'll move now to key development terms. And again, our hope is not to make any congregation an expert, but just sort of to alert you to the broad spectrum of things you need to be thinking about at this early discernment phase. We talked about zoning and density restrictions and the importance of that. This is something that the city and your local officials can help you work through. Entitlements and permitting are an important part of the stage, part of the later stage of the development project, and are essential to ensuring that the project will actually get built. And so the city needs to provide all of the entitlements and permitting required in order to break ground, and sometimes that can take longer than you might think. We've called this project the SB4 Accelerator Lab. And really our intention is to equip congregations to make use of that legislation and actually get units built. And so SB4 has a number of associated, not restrictions, but elements that need to be in place in order for the congregation to qualify for using that piece of legislation. And basically, as I said, what it essentially does is it makes it so that no matter how that congregation is zoned, because of SB4, if that congregation is a faith community that owns that land, it is zoned by right for the development of 100% affordable housing. If you want to build supportive housing, like workforce housing that is not 100% affordable, we're not in the SB4 universe anymore. The other important thing to know about is local operating subsidies. So those are important to have in place in order to proceed with a development, in order to unlock key funding streams that, so basically, we want to make sure that, or funders want to make sure that when a development is created, it's not just that you're creating a place for folks to live. We want to make sure that there are actually services that are going to go along with supporting the complexities of life for the folks who live in the development that you're going to build. And so local operating subsidies encourage partnerships with local community organizations that provide services, and typically are in harmony with the development that is built. So then there are different types of structures, and in which a church can get really creative in terms of how it shows up in the development relationship. And so I want to highlight this because I want to say to congregations, not just churches, but all congregations, that by owning this land, you have so much power to advocate for what you want. And so there are lots of technical real estate ownership structures that can support that vision. So for example, if as a congregation you say, you know what, we don't really need a lot of cash right now to support our ministries. What we would prefer is to have a structure where we're paid an amount every year as a result of the sale of the land that we are going to develop housing on. Now, you don't have to sell the land, but if you do, this is just to say that you could have a ground lease structure that allows congregations to receive not one big payment, but a payment that's spaced out over many years. And we talked about already the importance of understanding the complexity and the multiple phases within any development. And again, just to make sure that the congregation is ready for something that is going to take probably around a decade. So thank you. And at this point, I want to invite Landis, who's the CEO and founder of our company, DCG Strategies, to talk about Glad Tidings, which is a wonderful example and hopefully will provoke imagination for congregations interested in taking this next step.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Megan. You've done an amazing job thus far, and good to see everyone. So Glad Tidings is based in Hayward. Some of you may be familiar with their story, but they've been around for decades. Bishop Macklin has the suit with the sunglasses, right? The fountain is right behind him. And he was a young pastor when he founded Glad Tidings. If we can flip a slide. Keep going. So this perspective is, okay, so at the very bottom right, you will see a parking lot and some rooftops at the very bottom right. And that parking lot is where the church began. And then you can start, so I'm starting from the bottom right. And then they rented upstairs. The building's not visible in this perspective, but they were a tenant as a startup congregation. It was an Assemblies of God church, pretty small church, and they leased the second floor for a portion of the week. That led to them purchasing that lot that's really off the screen. If you look to the middle of the screen, almost to the center left of the middle, you see some blue roofs. And that is the new church that was eventually built. And then on the left side of this photo, you see some apartment buildings. And then just centered in the photo, you see apartment buildings. And basically, with the exception of maybe one property or two, the majority of what you see from the blue roofs to the street, to the main street to the right and to the left, all of that is the church campus. So it's been across the street from there on both sides. There's so much property, I'd have to kind of just take a pointer, but most of what you see is owned by the church. That's like immediate perspective. And you can flip the page. And what I wanted to just share, so this is the church looking backwards. So that the building on the left, which is it's occupied at this point. The apartments behind on both sides of the blue roofs. There's apartments immediately behind the blue roofs, and there's one to the right of the picture, upper right-hand corner. This is looking back from the opposite perspective. So the church, and you can flip another page. The church has been entrepreneurial. And what this brief case study is intended to inspire is you are not bound by the physical constraints of what you have or don't have in your current possession, but your vision for how you see your ministry unfolding can be realized. And by the way, the church started with no money, and the church just had vision, built partnerships, built relationships. It bought the building that it was leasing, and then it bought the apartments that were a little bit down the block because they wanted to provide affordable housing. They then started acquiring duplexes and single-family homes, and eventually started providing community programs out of many of those. They then ended up purchasing raw land and built that building where the blue roofs were, and on and on and on. And they've had county partnerships, city partnerships, federal partnerships, lots of community partnerships, affordable housing, welfare to work, food services, GED programs. If there is a community need, they were front and center providing that need. And prior to this, in Alameda County, which is in the East Bay, well, everyone knows Alameda County for the most part, from the Bay Area, this was top 2 or 3 most unsafe neighborhoods at the time. And it was so bad, the police did not take service calls into that community because it was that dangerous, even for the police. And so Bishop's philosophy was, light shines brightest where it's darkest. And he said, we're going to save this neighborhood, we're going to reclaim it, and we're going to just spread the ministry out into the community. And this slide highlights just the opportunistic perspective of the church. And during the Great Recession, when 2008, 2009, real estate was considered a toxic asset at that time, just because of the nature of the lending industry. And they had the upside down properties that a lot of us may be familiar with. So the banks were desperately wanting to rid those assets from their books. So they set up community revitalization programs. Chase was one. We participated. I was running the church's community development corporation at the time. We took about 24 donated houses, most of them in Northern California, but about 6 in Southside Chicago and some in SoCal, converted those to affordable housing, and generated about $1 million for the church. And you can flip this next slide. And so as we move into Paul, I just wanted to close with having vision starts the process. And as Megan touched on a prior slide, then having that congregational readiness and capacity. It doesn't mean that you have all the resources, but it does mean that you're united in your pursuit of that particular ministry objective. Then you surround yourself by good people and you just go make it happen. So we wanted to start with Glad Tidings because it's such a big story and there's a little bit for everyone to be able to see success. And it just reminds us that anything is possible. So I'm going to hand it over to Paul. Megan, you want to introduce Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're thrilled to be joined by Paul McElwee, who's going to be talking about, in the first part of the presentation, we talked about all of the relationships that, in which a congregation will be involved throughout the process of development. And the relationship a congregation has with the architect that they select for a development project is crucial to actually executing the congregation's vision and ensuring that the development ultimately reflects that. And so I'm thrilled to have Paul join us and tell us a little bit about his practice and some key tips and case studies about how congregations can best partner with an architect.
Okay, thank you, Megan. And thank you, Landis, for the inspirational story of Glad Tidings. And also thank you to DCG Strategies, San Francisco Interfaith Council, and Crankstart for hosting this event. Excited to share our experiences with you. Can we go ahead a couple of slides here, Trey? So I'll introduce our firm and talk a little bit about working with an architect. I think Megan's done a really good job of laying the groundwork, and it's going to maybe be a little bit repetitive in some of these things, but talk about how we work with your congregation early on and help you move from that vision to the beginnings of a building. We also will show you an example of a development we worked on a couple of years ago with the All Souls Episcopal Church up in North Berkeley, and talk a little bit about what we did with them. So moving on, a couple slides. So we are HKIT Architects. I've been working with HKIT for nearly 30 years now. Our firm was founded in 1948 in Richmond, and we're really rooted in the East Bay, but we do work all over the Bay Area, from Monterey up to Santa Rosa and beyond. So our firm's history is based in development of schools, churches, institutions, as well as housing, particularly senior housing and affordable housing. We've been working with nonprofit developers in the Bay Areas for decades, and we really love doing this work. It's really fulfilling, and it's really important at this point in time. As Megan and Linus mentioned, there's a complexity to real estate development, so you're going to want to surround yourself with a team of individuals and experts who have been down this road before. So we as architects are just one of a whole constellation of individuals who are going to be involved in your project. So as Megan mentioned, we're there for you in the early phases as you're going through a discernment process and identifying your vision and strengthening your congregation's leadership. We can come in at any point during that process and really help you to get an early vision established. We can do a reality check of your financial resources, your site, and start to help you move in a direction that's positive. In terms of engaging an architect early on, we're aware that your resources are fairly limited, and as you're going into the unknown of developing a project, you want to be judicious with your resources. So ideally working with an architect, you would take, we call baby steps. So rather than signing a huge contract for multi-year engagement, we're really just going to start doing the pieces that are necessary to get the project moving and go on a more gradual basis. Next slide, please. As you prepare to work with an architect, again, I think as Megan had mentioned, it's important that your congregation form a strong leadership group, a group of individuals who are really focused on the goal. And in terms of our work, when we interface with a congregation, we're going to be speaking to the group, but it's really important for us as the architect to have a single spokesperson on the church's behalf. So identifying that point of contact, that decision maker, is really important for us. So we have a single voice of someone who's representing the interests of the congregation. Talking again about the goals and vision, whether it's already established or whether we're part of that process to help you achieve the vision, and also assess the resources you have. In terms of just the real sort of nitty gritty, for us as architects, we can gather a lot of information about your property online, but it really is helpful if you already have surveys or any reports. If you've got a closet full of drawings somewhere in the basement, we can send over an intern to kind of go through and pull that out and figure out what's what. So that's a really important part that'll help us get a bit of a head start as we go forward with the studies. Selecting an architect, I think, as I mentioned before, having multifamily experience is really important, and having experience doing urban infill projects and conversions is also a critical piece. Finding an architect that has experience working with affordable housing developers is I think, an important characteristic. The development of affordable housing is quite different than the process of developing market rate housing. And in terms of working with the community to build consensus, working with multiple stakeholders, an architect that has worked with affordable housing developers will have this skill set. So I think it's a good thing to look for in your prospective architect. Affordable housing also tends to be more collaborative. So an architect that's done affordable housing will have experience working with contractors and developers really early on and throughout the entire design process. Next slide. So again, a little bit repetitive what Meg talked about earlier, but our engagement with your congregation can start quite early as you're looking at your vision. And what we'll start to do is do the site analysis. And we mentioned earlier zoning, physical characteristics. We'll go into an in-depth study of all those things. We'll also start to develop what we call test fits or capacity studies or yield studies. And that is us doing sketchy studies to see, how many pieces will fit on this site, and what types of pieces. Are these big units, small units, so on and so forth. This is the process we'll work through with the congregation until we get a vision that we're all happy with. And at that point, then we would go into the developer selection process and engage the broader community. Site analysis, again, Megan showed a similar slide, but we're really looking at the physical factors. Is there access to the site? We maintain access. We mentioned emergency vehicles, transit, noise, the surrounding context. We really put on our detective's hat at this point, and we dig into the site and try to find out, what we know and what we don't know, and dig out things like there may be hidden features, easements, covenants that are not immediately apparent, but we're going to dig in and try to find all those things. So we don't get surprised later. Next slide. Zoning, again, what you can and cannot build as determined by a jurisdiction. There's 2 permits you're going to need. You need a permit from the city's planning department, called entitlements. That's a community process. That's a design process. And then you're going to have your building permits. That's not a community process. That's the developer and the architect working and permitting drawings for through a building department. So what we're really talking about with zoning is our planning approval process. The next step. And we mentioned earlier SB4 as a tool, but there's a whole host of zoning controls that we're going to look into and do our deep research to find out what's possible and how can we maximize the use of the site. Next slide. Here's an example of a sketch site study. This is a site we looked at down in Santa Cruz. And this particular congregation, they had quite a bit of land, and we looked at various options. This is one of the options that we studied. This is not a final design, but it starts to give you a sense of scale and what will really fit. It also starts to give you a sense of the character of the site. So for instance, certain sites may be quite compact and in an urban area, and they're well served by transit, but there's not a lot of open space and there's no parking. A site like that may be more suited towards seniors or special needs individuals. Whereas a site that's maybe a bit more suburban, has a bit more land, has some parking space, has some open space, might be more appropriate for a family housing project. So the fit studies help you determine not only how much, how big, but also what type and how, what the characteristics are and what would be the best fit for your congregation. So second step of the process, we've got a design, we've got an idea, we've got a vision, we know where we're going to go with the site. We need to get that planning approval, that entitlement. And as I mentioned before, it's a public process, so we may be engaging with the community while we're getting planning approvals. It can take several months up to a year to secure your approvals to build what you want to build on the planning level. Next slide. So mentioned that the developer partner comes into the process at this point, and we as architects can help with the selection as well as, of course, DCG strategies. Our experience is fairly deep. You can see a list on the right-hand side here of various nonprofit housing developers that we've worked with over the last few decades. And you can see many of these are faith-based organizations. So there's a sort of a long history of this. So as you're looking for a developer partner, and I imagine this is going to be covered in more depth in future series here, but looking at a firm that has done work in your geographic area, do they have experience with this type of project? If you're doing supportive housing, has this firm had a good track record developing supportive housing, for instance? So we can help you and share our experience with these various groups and help identify the strengths of each of these companies that might make them a better fit for your congregation. Next slide. Community engagement, led by the developer, but we are an active part of that as architects. We come in with no designs at our first meeting, and we really just are there to listen and to understand the community. We want to earn the community's trust. Working with a faith-based partner, that's usually a lot easier because there's already a pre-existing relationship that the congregation has with the community. So we really try to leverage that as much as we can and work through to really get everybody on board with the project. Mentioned the 2 permits, planning, now building. Now we're into building. Now we're really into sort of a heads down production phase. The documentation, we're going to bring in a team of consultants, which includes landscape architects, engineers. We'll have about 12 people on our team to produce a complete set of construction documents. These are going to be the drawings the contractor is going to price and build from, and we'll hit our building permits using the set of drawings. Our involvement doesn't stop once we've done our drawings. We work through the permitting process, which can take a long time depending on the building department. We'll assist with the bidding of the project and the pricing. We'll work with the contractor if there's price overruns. We'll do some redesign as we need to bring the cost into budget. And we'll be there throughout the entire construction process. We'll be there weekly in meetings, site visits, all the way through closeout and the final inspection of the project. And so all told, we're looking at, I think as Megan mentioned, this is a multi-year process. Actually, these photographs at the bottom of the page, you can see on the left-hand side, this is a rendering of a veterans housing development we worked on down in Marina. We started in 2013, and the picture in the lower right was taken a few months ago. So give you an idea, this particular project was a 12-year process. And it can take a long time, but we've been there since day one, and we're still here as it's being opened up and leased up. So, yeah, again, sharing an example. Mentioned Father Phil Brochard and his congregation in North Berkeley. This was a collaboration with the All Souls Episcopal Church, along with Satellite Affordable Housing Associates, or SAHA. They're a Berkeley-based nonprofit housing developer. Next slide. This was their church before. They had a parking lot and a parish house. You could start to see a little bit of it on the far right-hand side, but sort of a sloping site right adjacent their existing sanctuary and fellowship hall. So this fit study, yield study process that we went in with them, you could see a few of the early studies we did were representing the units as simple blocks. There was an early decision to go with small studio units for seniors. There was also a need to house some of the church functions. So, making sure we're building the housing, but also positioning the church for future growth and providing the facilities they need. So on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a series of blocks stepped up here. The tan blocks are the housing. The blue blocks on the left-hand side and the purple block are all shared facilities. They're church offices, community space. And then finally, there's some pink blocks on the left-hand side. That's actually the pastor's residence. So you can see there's really a sort of a blending of functions with the church and the housing, and a very tight partnership was formed to make all these pieces work, including church parking, resident parking, open space, so on and so forth. Next slide. We work closely with the congregation's leadership to develop an architectural style. They had a very particular style they were after in this historic neighborhood. They wanted to look at a more traditional form building. So we prepared many studies and iterations of design. Next slide. And this is the final product as it turned out. 54 units of affordable senior housing, and community spaces, support spaces, all within this building in the neighborhood. And next slide. The apartment has its own lobby entrance. Next slide. We also have shared spaces. As I mentioned, this is the community spaces and the pastor's residence, and these pieces that were part of All Souls program. And this is the courtyard that's now between the existing church and the housing. And this space was envisioned for use by the residents of the housing, but also, again, a shared space that could be used by the congregation. They had an artist do this beautiful engraved labyrinth design in the middle of the courtyard, and we have landscaping, vegetable beds, and so forth, and the shared community space is just adjacent to this courtyard. So, as I mentioned, another long process to get here, but here we are a few years later on the grand opening day. Always really exciting. And here is our team on the right with one of the residents. She's got the lanyard on, and she is a senior who was formerly homeless and was just over the moon to have a new apartment and be in this new community. So really a success, and really excited to be a part of this project. So next slide. Yeah, so happy to take your questions, and I will turn it back to Megan or Michael.
Paul, I have to tell you, I was looking at the initial external slide you had for All Souls, and it looked like it would fit perfectly in San Francisco architecturally. It really just, it looked like it would blend in any neighborhood in San Francisco. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to all of our presenters. This was comprehensive. This was helpful. This was transparent and realistic. And I also wanted to share with our attendees, because I know that we have some housing advocates on the line here today, that the recording link is going to be shared by day's end today. And we encourage you to share it with your constituents, and it will be archived also on our webpage. I did want to, we have a little bit of time for some questions, and I did want to raise them. Landis, in particular, I wanted to just thank you for your comments on vision, because we hear in Proverbs that people without vision shall perish. And I think it's a distinguishing factor for faith communities, both faith and vision, in reclaiming and transfiguring space for the greater good, and to see how that one neighborhood not only created housing, but it created safety, and really was an icon, if you will, of what was intended for that in the first place. Just a couple of questions, because I know, Paul, you talked about community, but this whole thing is centered around SB4. And I'm going to ask, both Megan and Landis, if we can just drill down a little bit about what SB4 is, what SB4 isn't. Is it really going to make it easier for congregations of all sizes to build housing on their land? And I'm wondering if you can tackle that. I know, by the way, I know that this took 3 times to come to fruition. You might also talk to some of the challenges that it faced along the way, and in the name of transparency.
Well, I'd love to hear your perspective as an architect, and then I think we can chime in on the developer side.
Yeah, the SB4 essentially is primarily about changing use restrictions. In the past, as we mentioned, zoning, it allows you to build certain things in certain areas, and other areas you can't. So traditionally, churches and nonprofit institutions have been considered like an institutional use, and as such, you historically have not been able, by zoning right, to build housing on institutional land. There's sort of always been a dark line between the two. So SB4 essentially erases that line in terms of use, stipulating that if this is 100% affordable, then that zoning gets overridden, basically, and across the state, any land then is opened up for residential development. That's the main thing. I think they're not only, I mean, in terms of use, but also your entitlement process is streamlined. So instead of a public process that may take months and months, you might be able to get a ministerial approval. But again, that depends on the size of the project. And there's other rules like a minimum of 10 units and so on and so forth. But I kind of leave it. Maybe Megan and Landis have more information than that. But from the architect's point of view, that's what my takeaway is.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we've seen a lot of excitement around SB4. So I think it's something that has kind of ignited interest amongst faith communities who may have kind of been thinking about this, and now with SB4, it seems like something that is more realistic. I think ultimately what it accomplishes is it really de-risks the process for a developer. So, if you think about all of the things that have to happen in order for a project to be built, this really removes a critical but only a portion of the process, which is that ability to designate the site for affordable housing. I do also want to mention that the bill is set to sunset on January 1, 2036, which feels like it's a long time away, but as we talked about with these development timelines and horizons, 10 years is really not that far away. And so I think there is an opportunity for additional advocacy, one, to extend that sunset period. But also, I think the thing I would love to see with this bill is funding. So we know that this is part of that process, but the biggest place where we see congregations pause and get delayed is with this big question of, well, how are we going to pay for it? And SB4 unfortunately does not provide funding.
I'll just add about SB4. The pre-SB4 world, it was not difficult to derail a project through political advocacy for the local policymakers. And as Megan said, it de-risks, but what you had was an environment where neighbors could organize, get a petition, go to the board of supervisors or councils, and just protest and have a lot of weight in the process, even if their concern was only, we just don't want to see a new project, and there were no other legitimate concerns that really had true impacts, traffic or something else. So SB4 is a tool that allows ministries to have a less risky process, and it serves as a counteraction against those that want to organize to stop housing just as a matter of their value system.
Thank you. Eric Johnson, one of our attendees, asks the following question. Do the housing developments generally end up being owned wholly by the church with a stream of income at the end of the process? Is the 50-unit development the demarcation of when an affordable housing project can be sustainable on the back end with P&I payments, et cetera? Are you open to modular housing projects?
Yeah, so I'll start off, and if Paul or Megan want to weigh in. So how you show up in the actual formal relationship as the landowner is negotiable. We in partnership with San Francisco Foundation, San Francisco Interfaith Council, and DCG led a series of workshops called the Ministry of Housing. I would point you to that because we really elaborated on those different relationships. We had an entire session focused on how does a ministry show up. But to answer your question directly, there is the very prior common way where a church would just sell or lease to the developer and negotiate the best deal possible and lose complete control. We've advocate for exploring the co-developer option. It's not for everyone, and not all developer partners will agree to that, but more and more we're seeing that. And that allows the landowner, which is the church, to participate in the developer fee and also show up as a primary in the development relationship. There are ways to mitigate the risk. In terms of density and threshold, it's a rule of thumb for economics because there are a lot of different capital sources required, and the capital sources want to have as many units as possible, so it's economies of scale. So rule of thumb is 50, but we've seen it less if there's a strategic need for it. And then how you configure the space and what's the amenity space and clergy housing and others, those are all design variables, which is another plug for being a co-developer, because if you're in a co-developer relationship, then you're really able to help shape that policy. But if you lease or sell, then you really have no voice other than when you negotiate your land deal, you can attempt to ask for certain things back, but you won't have control over density, and the revenue is hit or miss. So it just really depends on the deal itself.
In the name of time, I just want to touch on, because I think, Paul, you really spoke about community engagement in a lot of what you had to say. And I've got sort of two questions here, and maybe you can field them both at the same time, if that's okay. Can you discuss the role of community input in the development process and how faith-based organizations can ensure their housing projects genuinely reflect the needs of their neighborhood? That's number one. And how can faith-based organizations measure the potential impact of its housing development project on both its congregation and the wider community before fully committing to the project?
Yeah. The community process always makes the building better. We come into a design and we get feedback, and as architects, sometimes it's hard to hear, then the feedback is negative, but we listen, we gather the feedback from the community, and we come back a month later and we tell the community what we heard, and we show what we've done in response to that. It's about listening and responding. And it's also about being realistic. I mean, we engage a community. We've already done a lot of work before we show up for a community, and we know in our back of our mind what's possible and what's not. So we want to be realistic and say, look, I mean, we're building a building here. It's going to be this big. To give the neighborhood a realistic assessment of what to expect, and not to mislead them. And then once we have that established, we gather feedback. And the building belongs to the neighborhood in a similar way it belongs to the congregation. I mean, it's going to be there for years and years in the neighborhood. We want to be a good neighbor and build a building that's not only going to enhance the site and congregation, but really the larger community. And you're seeing, like the Glad Tidings, for instance, what an amazing transformative effect that had on the entire neighborhood, beyond just providing homes. So I think, there's an impact to the congregation, there's an impact to the neighborhood, as they, develop these new apartments. But it's really important. I mean, the bills and the streamlining that allow this, what we call by right development, where a landowner can build what they want without a public process, without any constraint. I mean, it's a wonderful tool, and it's a really good way to reduce the uncertainty, to expedite the process. But even with a by right development, where we don't necessarily need the community buy-in, we think it's still important to talk to the community and to get their buy-in anyhow, because you're going to be there for the long haul. So this expedited process is great, but we still think it's really important to take the time and to earn the trust of your neighbors, and have them be part of the process as well.
On that note, I just want to say, when we first met our good friends at DCG Strategies back in 2017, was it, Landis? This was a component, not just the spiritual discernment within the community, but within the congregation, but how to talk to the greater community. I know is an important component of DCG's work, and And it really helped us sleep better at night in terms of the partnership that we have and to provide for the congregation. So thank you very much. And I know that, SB4 too is also sort of an incentive because the city and county of San Francisco has to build 82,000 new units. And so there needs to be some instrument to help incentivize. I agree, Megan. I wish the funding came with it. But the faith community is trying to do its part, and that's what this is all about. And that's why this series is so critical. And we thank our presenters for sharing their sage wisdom, and we thank those who are online for being with us as well. And we look forward to seeing you all next month on June 26th at this same time for our next in the series of virtual educational workshops entitled SB4 Housing Accelerator Lab, Fast Tracking Affordable Housing on Faith Land in San Francisco. Thank you so much. God bless you and have a beautiful day.